You're going out there to destroy them.
That's the plan.
All right, I'm in.
The first time she survived the most terrifying creature in the universe, she thought the nightmare was over.
Something under the floor.
It hadn't even begun.
Coming straight for us.
That's inside the room.
Sigourney Weaver, Aliens, the new movie. This time, it's war. Rated R.
Get away from her, you bitch, because this is Cinema Arcade, the podcast about movies, video games, and all those sparks that fly when those two worlds collide. My name is Steve Guntley, holding a flamethrower strapped to an assault rifle. And who else is joining me today?
Hi, I have a shotgun that is missing part of the barrel because I'm a cool kid.
True.
I'm
his
also
name.
Justin.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I'm
me.
a pair of guns duct taped together for supreme efficiency. J-Band.
Yes. I mean, that must be about as efficient as like holding the gun sideways when you're shooting, right? Like the old 90s trope.
Can confirm.
Yeah, you
that
can
is not
confirm?
accurate.
Yeah, you can confirm. I think that would be a bad way to shoot
I
things.
spent
but-
some time at a few shooting ranges.
But look, I doubt those shooting ranges were crawling with acid-blooded monsters, though. So
No.
maybe it would have made a little bit of a
Well,
difference.
there were some Boy Scouts.
Oh yeah, same difference. So we're very excited. Today we are continuing our Aliens mini-series by talking about Aliens. That's right, the 1986 sequel to the 1979 Ridley Scott classic. This one is directed by James Cameron, who also wrote the movie, and it stars Sigourney Weaver, Michael Biehn, Paul Reiser, Jeanette Goldstein, Bill Paxton, William Hope, Carrie Henn, and the great Lance Henriksen. Holy shit, what a movie this is. My God, I love this movie so much.
Action-packed.
Action-packed. I showed this to a friend maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I watch this movie annually. I do an annual run of the entire Alien series. But a few years ago, I watched it with a friend who had never seen it before. And afterwards, he's like, all right, so I've seen the term white knuckle on a lot of like movie posters, and I never knew what that meant until watching this movie, because he was actually gripping his seat. It's so relentless. It is so fun. It's just like a nonstop, like 2.5-hour roller coaster of a movie.
Yeah, I was watching it with Christian, and he was like standing up, coming back to the couch, standing up, coming back to the couch, just like completely enthralled of the movie.
Oh, it's just so good. So good. Justin, is this first timer for you?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So what did you think of all the action on screen here in Aliens?
It was a good time. I had a vague idea of what the final fight was.
Okay.
I actually thought that was the ending of the first movie.
Oh, with
And
the
then I
queen
was
battle?
like,
yeah.
wait a minute, the loader battle.
Yeah.
Technically.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is really, I said it last week, but this is one of those series where, like, depending on the time of day and my mood and how the sun is casting shadows in certain ways, like, this is either my favorite movie in the series or the first one. They scratch very, very different itches, but they're both so exceptional at what they do. James Cameron actually described it pretty well. He said the first movie is kind of like a haunted house at an amusement park. The second movie is a roller coaster.
Yeah.
So you're still
Yeah.
in the same theme park, but you're getting a different experience out of it.
I love the movie Starship Troopers.
Yes.
Yeah.
And after watching this, so much was like either close or like direct homages
yes.
to this movie.
Quietly one of the most influential movies
Yeah.
of at least our lifetime. Well, yeah, it's not your life. It's J-Ban and I's lifetime, but
Yeah.
like
No, honestly though, one of the most interesting and enjoyable characters in the Halo video games was based off of the sergeant in this game.
yes, Apone. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it's touched so many of the things that I enjoyed growing up, between Halo, Starship Troopers, and really just the sci-fi genre and as a whole.
Yeah.
So much can kind of be traced back to things like this. Like they set up, automated sentry guns. They fortified their position in a place that was very, and it's like that is common in so many games. In fact,
that's the thing. That's what's so interesting about this game. Like, yes, this was influential to movies, like the concept of the burly space marines and all these lingo that they're throwing at each other. That was very influential and imitated many times. But I would argue that this movie is more influential on video games than almost any other film I can think of. Like,
'cause again, you can trace so much of Halo back to the way the Marines in this behaved.
yeah,
Partly because the person who throughout most of the game series is in charge of all of the Marines around you
yeah.
is directly inspired by, like, very, very directly inspired by the character here. But then also
Basically,
just
any
like
video game where your character has a helmet was probably inspired by this movie to some degree, right? Like, regardless of the time period, like a little bit.
a lot of sci-fi helmets end up looking all the same. They look a lot like the helmets from this.
Yeah.
There's points in like the Halo series. Again, I'm going to reference that a lot right now.
No, there's a lot of Halo.
I
There's a
grew
lot
up
of Alien
so
DNA in
much around this. The
Yeah.
Halo series was the first game that I played. I was like, oh, this is art. There's a full score soundtrack. Like, this is fucking great.
Yeah.
And there's direct quotes that I was picking up and going, oh, I remember that from this cutscene or this section. And so much of like just the background, like Marine dialogue when you're fighting or like in between fights and stuff.
Yeah.
Was so close to like the stuff that you're getting throughout all of this.
Yeah. I mean, it's really incredible to see all the ripple effects and the fact that this movie doesn't feel like, sometimes you'll watch a movie and it's like this is where the cliche comes from. But if you don't know that,
Yeah.
you're watching
Yeah.
it and you think, oh, this is just a bunch of cliches. But this movie is still fun on its own. It doesn't feel dated. It doesn't feel like tired or anything like that. It's just kind of a blast from start to finish.
Well, each individual like Marine and character has their own point of view and their own response to each crisis.
Yeah.
And so it's more of a nuanced storytelling than like and sort of like an actual photograph of an actual team. And
Yeah.
so I really liked that about this.
I also loved the linear decrease. And at some points, it gets closer to exponential decrease of toxic masculinity in this movie, where they
Oh,
start
my
off all
God.
macho, we can take on the world, and by the end, they're like, "Oh my God, dude, we're all gonna die."
It is so insane that this movie has so much to say about like gender roles and like dynamics like that. Like, this has been reappraised as kind of a post-feminist classic,
Yeah.
which I really am here for.
Oh, well, it was even funny in the entry. Like they both made it. It was very pro LGBTQ because she's like checking out Ripley in the beginning. Vasquez is, and then this other guy was like made it within a Iscarion, and he's like, yeah, it was a man, but it's like, oh, that doesn't matter. It's still an Iscarion.
Right, yeah. Which is also interesting because this is expanding the universe a little bit. So now we know that there are other aliens
Yeah.
in this universe, right? Like, there's aliens that we are apparently sexually compatible with on some level. That's kind of a big reveal, especially because we don't really see that followed up on in any of the other movies.
And I thought that was an interesting thing that I had kind of picked up on when they were introducing Ripley to them all, and she was telling the story, and they're like, they were talking, because in my head, again, never having seen this movie, but having heard so many references to it, like, Xenomorph to me was just the alien, but that's actually not the case. It's a broad classification.
Right.
This is just the big one that you encounter during the movies.
That's the thing, yeah, and we just kind of call it the Xenomorph. I want to talk a little bit about the production of this because J-Man might know this. This movie has one of the most legendary, possibly apocryphal pitch meetings of all time. Do you know this story? Okay,
I do
so
not.
James Cameron, when he was rallying to get this gig, well, first of all, he was writing a spec script for this in 1983 while he was working on his breakout film, The Terminator. And so he had this kind of ready to go. He knew this is what he wanted his next thing to be. When he finally got the meeting with the Fox execs, all he did was come in, he brought a whiteboard, he wrote the word alien on the whiteboard, paused, added an S
I know
at the
this.
end of the title, paused, then turned that S into a $sign and dropped the marker. That was his pitch, and it worked. It really worked. It's one of the cockiest, most bullshit things, if true. Which I believe it's true, but yeah.
I don't believe that's true. I mean, like, people want to make movies too much for something to be like that to be bold enough. Like
That's
I don't know.
yeah. I mean,
It's
that's
a great story.
that's the thing though. Like Cameron already, like he had 1.5 films under his belt. Okay, he had The Terminator, which was an unexpected hit and an all-time classic. We'll get to it eventually. And he had Piranha 2: The Spawning from 1981, which he only directed half of and then walked out because it was a terrible movie. But even with that, just that little bit, like, and before this, he was a truck driver in Canada. Okay, that's his origins. He was a truck driver who then started working on special effects for movies and then became a filmmaker. But even at this early point, like The Terminator was a hit, and he was already swinging his clout around to the point that his girlfriend at the time, Gail Ann Hurd, she got her start as a producer on this primarily because she was the one person on the cast who could stand up to him. Like she was the one person who was willing to tell him no. And she's gone on to have a very successful career. She produced The Walking Dead,
Oh, wow.
which is
Oh.
probably just still to this day a money printing machine. But
Somehow.
yes, but initially Fox didn't want to make this movie for some reason. So it's hard to imagine now, but sequels used to be kind of seen as lower class, desperate, not something that was a requirement. But we were entering into this new era of blockbuster filmmaking, starting with Jaws, and Superman, movies like that, where all of a sudden it's not only profitable to make a sequel, like fans are kind of expecting it. And so ideas for an Alien sequel were getting kicked around for a couple years, but things got tied up because Fox took some, we'll call them creative accounting practices to write off the first Alien movie as a loss, despite making more than like $200 million for them. They wrote it off as a loss so they wouldn't have to pay the producers. The producers ultimately sued the crap out of them, which held up production on any kind of Alien movie for a while. Sigourney Weaver originally did not want to come back because the first movie was pretty special to her, and she didn't, again, sequels were thought of as just a cheap cash-in, just something that is going to diminish the legacy of the original film. But she liked James Cameron's script, and they got along, and so she signed up for this. And this wound up being a really good move for her because this movie got her a Best Actress nomination at the Oscars. This made her the first woman to ever be nominated for a science fiction film. Like, one of the coolest nominations of all time, in my opinion, because it's just like genre stuff like this gets so overlooked, like almost entirely, especially like if it gets acknowledged, it's for the visual effects, it's for the sound effects, it's things like that. And this did win Oscars for both of those. But yeah, you never really see the acting get noticed in movies like this. But Ripley has really become like very full formed as the character that we know. Like the first movie, she's young, she's by the book, she's stern, like she clearly has some grit, and she's clearly able to survive the situation just by being smarter than everyone else. But she's not like the super badass that she is in this. Yeah. But the amazing way that they write it and that Weaver plays it is that this is not Rambo. This is not a Schwarzenegger character. This is not interchangeable. She still does get to be a vulnerable, rational human being. She's not just a mindless killing machine, but she will do whatever it takes to protect people. And that makes her pretty incredible.
Well, they've definitely upped the ante of her going after Jonesy to going after Newt.
Yes.
And a remarkably good child actor. Because I'm a bit of a, like, you've heard me talk previously about, like, sometimes child acting gets under my skin, and like this kid just really nails it. Absolutely nails it.
It helps that I'll say, like, give her time. Like, at the start of the movie, she's not super vocal. Yeah. She's not very responsive. And so over time, though, you get to see that development, too, of, like, starting to talk a little bit more, feeling more comfortable.
And you see little ways where she's like bonding with Hicks and Hudson, like she clearly has her own little shorthand with them. Like she clearly has picked Hudson as her favorite, even though he's like terrified and like not really in the position to be taking care of a kid. But she's clearly glommed onto him like, oh, you're the funny one. I like you. Yeah, the actress's name is Carrie Henn. She did not do any more acting after this. She's a school teacher now and does conventions once in a while. Apparently, she and Sigourney Weaver are still close friends. But
Oh, that's nice.
yeah, she didn't want to act anymore, which, good for her. That's great.
I like the idea that the kids get a sub one day and they're like, "Where were you?" And they're like, "Oh, I was at Comic-Con." And you're like,
Yeah.
"What?"
You're signing autographs for 100,000 people. Big deal. Yeah, the rest. I want to go into this rest of this cast because holy shit, I love this entire cast. We have Michael Biehn. We have a couple of transplants from the Terminator. Michael Biehn is one of them. He's the hero of that movie, and he plays Corporal Hicks here. I always like Michael Biehn, especially in this era, because he's like an old man trapped in a hot young man's body, right? Like he seems prematurely grizzled. There's just something about him that I really like. But I think his character here, again, like you were saying, Justin, like sort of rebelling against the toxic masculinity. He stands out from all the other Marines who are all like, hoorah, let's go in and kill everything. Yeah. He's just kind of comfortable all the time. He's just cool as shit, and I really like him. And he immediately defers to Ripley when he realizes that she's the smartest person in the room.
Early on, I did like a bit of a double take because, this movie's kind of older, and I was like, that's not Timothy Oliphant, is it? Because that's so much of who he reminded me of.
Yeah, they've got a similar vibe.
Yeah. A similar energy.
Yeah. And then I was like, it's not. However, he's doing a great job, this person.
And it's a nice contrast from his character in Terminator, who is like by design very, very high strung and very serious. Like he gets to be a little more relaxed here, which is a fun choice. Also coming back from Terminator is Lance Henriksen here playing Bishop. Lance Henriksen, a pretty amazing guy. We covered him a little bit in my other podcast recently when we were talking about the movie version of The Pit and the Pendulum. Lance Henriksen was illiterate until the age of 30.
Oh, wow.
He learned to read after getting out of the Navy, and then he...
The Navy didn't teach him how to read?
I'm sure he picked up some of it, but he enrolled in acting school in London after getting out of the Navy, and then became a really respected stage actor, and still going to this day. He's in his late 80s, and he's still very prolific. What a voice on that guy.
Yeah, such a good voice.
And it's a great character, Bishop the android, because we need him to be a different type of android than Ash.
Yeah.
Because the important designation here is that Ripley, at the end of the first movie, she escapes in that pod, and she freezes herself, hoping that someone would pick her up in a few weeks. She's been floating out in space for 57 years.
Yeah.
So things have advanced dramatically. Like technology is very different. Like all of these people are very different.
And the company that she works for has been acquired by a different company.
Yeah.
And so now upper management's not the same.
Exactly. But
Still
their goals are still
capitalist
the same.
jerks,
Yeah.
but
But
the people who were in charge of this is probably not around of the first movie to the second movie.
It gives her a nice like kind of fish out of water plot line for Ripley. It gives her kind of stronger motivation for why she wouldn't want to stay in the safe space station, why she would choose to go on this mission, because there's kind of nothing for her there. But there's also like I was not aware until I was an adult that there was an extended cut of this movie. I only had the original theatrical cut on VHS, and the extended cut includes an entire subplot where they introduce that Ripley has a daughter, who is now grown and deceased, right? Like
she died at like 66 or 68.
Yeah. And Amanda Ripley is the name of the character. She's the hero of Alien Isolation, the game that we were playing last week. So that's a whole thing about Amanda Ripley. But I didn't know any of that watching this until like I was an adult, and I'm like, holy shit. I think the maternal themes still come through with her and Newt without them actually saying.
Yeah. I don't think you need that. I think that's a little extra, but in my cut, I just don't believe that you needed that at all. Because you believe that Ripley would care about this child because this child exists.
Yeah, and she's a good person, and she's like, and there's also a scene where we get to see Newt with her family, which again I would argue is not really necessary. I like that she's kind of a reveal. I like that they're not expecting a child to be alive.
So then does that mean that the conversation she has later about her daughter, was that in the shorter cut, or was that only in the extended cut?
The daughter is not mentioned in the theatrical cut at all.
She has like a little heart-to-heart conversation with Newt about her daughter.
Right. Yeah, that's not in it at all. But A little bit more about the cast. Bill Paxton, another person,
Yeah.
technically from the Terminator. He played the thug in the beginning that Arnold Schwarzenegger punches in the heart. But yeah, he is Corporal Hudson in this movie. Probably the breakout character of this movie. He's the frantic kind of comic relief guy. He's the shit talker who like is just freaked out at all times.
Game over, man.
Yes,
Game
game
over.
over.
Game over, man, is such a great line. His whole energy is just so funny and so fantastic. I love Bill Paxton.
And very understandable.
Very understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the one person who's reacted. Like, he's kind of the audience surrogate in that way because all of us would be doing that.
He starts off as kind of a toxic douchebag.
Yeah.
And then almost immediately it's gone. And you're like, oh, so that whole thing was just an act, huh, buddy?
Oh, yeah, it was all swagger. It's all swagger. He's a frightened little boy, but, you know, he gets the job done when you need him to.
He's a frightened little boy who was apparently 4 weeks away from completing his...
Yes. I still miss Bill
rough.
Paxton. We
Yeah.
lost him, like almost 10 years now. We
Something
lost
like
him a
that.
while ago, but he
I
was
think
so
it
great.
might be closer to 5
Okay.
to 7.
Yeah, probably around
Because
there.
I know he was actually in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Oh, okay.
As
okay.
a major character for the first season or two.
That's right. Yeah, he did
And,
pop up in that. Yeah.
But I don't know a whole lot about Bill Paxton as a person. I just know that every time I've seen him in a show,
Yeah.
he just seems like probably a guy that was fun to be around as part of the production.
That's his reputation. That's why he got so much work for so long. I think people just enjoyed working with him. Also, he and Lance Henriksen share a distinction. Both of them have been killed by a Terminator, an alien, and a Predator on screen.
Oh,
Yeah, both of them have. Those two have that distinction. And
do we know if he died in this movie? Bishop?
No, he didn't. Technically, he's a Dandroid, but he does get killed in Alien versus Predator by an alien.
Oh.
Yeah,
Spoilers.
Yeah, maybe we can spoil that movie.
He does get pretty fucked up in this movie.
He sure does. He sure does. Speaking possibly of fucked up, I do just need to bring this up because I want to talk about Jeanette Goldstein. Jeanette Goldstein she was a bodybuilder who got cast to play the role of Vasquez. Now, Jeanette Goldstein is not a Latina woman. She is wearing body paint in this. If you've seen her in other movies, you might remember her as like the Irish mother in Titanic. Where she looks very, very different.
Ooh.
So there's some brown face going on here, and I think it's something that like people don't really remark upon very much, mostly because people love Vasquez. Vasquez is such an awesome, like, badass character. But that is something that kind of needs to be brought up.
I had no idea.
Most people don't.
It's
Yeah.
so weird.
She's
And I
very
think that might be how they
convincing.
got away with it so much.
That's the thing. Yeah, she's very convincing. But yeah, I don't believe she has any kind of Latino heritage. So, you know, it's kind of borderline, but it's just something I wanted to toss out just to,
Well, it's so interesting because like Vasquez is such a strong character, like, and that's unfortunate because like Vasquez is such a badass and like a different type of like feminine character that like is just, I don't know, like I really love the badassness that she brings to the screen.
Yeah, and she's more than holding her own with all these like alpha dudes in her squad, like, yeah, like you said, it's implied that she's kind of like bisexual or at least like hetero fluid, like because she and what is the guy's name? It's not. I'm looking at my mug that has a Drake. She and Drake clearly have like a thing.
I think they have a bromance. Like they're both heavy machine gunners. Like I don't know. Like I got more bromance from that situation.
There's definitely a tight connection between those two characters. So but she is a fascinating character. She is great. It's like great that we have this 5'5" like Latina woman as the bruiser. Like she's the muscle of the whole group, which is pretty amazing. But there is just that one element that casts a little bit of a cloud over it. So this movie was a big hit. Came out, it grossed more than the first one, and got more critical praise. I think when the most common complaint is that your movie is too intense, it probably means you're doing something right.
Yeah.
But it was pretty praised across the board, and I think it's thought of now as one of the best, if not the best, sequels of all time.
Yeah,
like it's
I
definitely
do
in
think
that
that's fair.
conversation.
Well, and it definitely does, like, when you talk about sequels, like what the point of a sequel is, like, is like doubling down on a lot of things. And like, I really love this type of sequel where it changes genres.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like there's a very few examples, but I feel like generally speaking, changing genres in sequels is like one of my favorite things to do because you can really explore the world.
Absolutely.
Fun fact: Starship Troopers did the reverse, where they started off with the Marines movie,
Yeah.
and then they went to a more like atmospheric horror movie in the sequel.
Oh, right. Yeah, they had those direct-to-video sequels. Yeah.
Because I don't know if the second one was direct to video, but I believe everything that came after
They
was
were,
direct to
yeah,
video.
They all were, yeah.
The second, because they went from having a budget of like 100 million to like 10 million.
Yeah, but I mean, you're exactly right, and that's my favorite thing about this franchise is that every movie, they all four of these movies in this quadrilogy are sci-fi horror films. I think you can fairly call them they have elements of sci-fi horror, but they all have incredibly different feels. They all feel very much like auteur-driven films. Like a Ridley Scott film does not feel like a James Cameron
that's
film, which
true.
does not feel like a David Fincher film. Like
So far, it's the different balance between horror and sci-fi, where the first one was more towards horror,
Yeah.
and the second one was more towards sci-fi.
Yes.
But there were still elements of both present throughout each movie.
Absolutely, and you'll see as we go on in the series, like 3 and 4 feel like totally different, but still kind of a piece to varying degrees of success, and I'm excited to go into those.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing where I think about like musical covers, where I love it when I love watching covers of like not like I'm gonna play this song exactly how they do, but like we're just gonna like the Nine Inch Nails "Hurt" being covered by Johnny Cash.
Sure.
Stuff like that. I just love reimagining of those things, and this kind of touched on it in that similar kind of way of like. It's not a remake, obviously. It's a sequel,
Yeah.
but it's a different movie.
It's a riff. It's riffing on kind of the same themes, but it still feels very much of a piece. It feels
Yeah.
like this belongs in this universe.
It's not like going from one Star Wars movie to the next, and they're all pretty close the same.
Yeah.
This was a drastic shift to a different, almost genre entirely, from going from almost horror to closer to action, or from very horror to closer to action movie.
Yeah.
But then again, without dropping the DNA while doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I just have nothing but love for this series. Like, there's so many little standout moments from Game Over Man to, the ambush of the first time when the aliens come out of the walls. And it is really such a brilliant escalation. Like, obviously, if the first movie is just one alien attacking like a small group of unarmed people, the second one should be a lot of aliens attacking a larger group of heavily armed people. And then we see how that balance shifts,
Well,
so
they definitely keep ratcheting up the suspense as the series goes on. Like the ship exploding, the fact that they put a timer of like, oh no, they've hit like the core is going to explode in this many minutes. Like there's a ticking time clock on all of these. Like there was in the first one as well, and they definitely brought it back for the second. Upped the ante.
I liked
really
how they gave you what you expected without you realizing that because going into this movie, you're like, okay, well, something's definitely happened here. There's going to be more than one predator. More than one alien. And then you hit the moment where they're like, there's hundreds of these things. And you're like, that's what I would have expected out of that room of hundreds to maybe even thousands of eggs hanging out. I guess this is what I kind of thought was going to be here.
I mean, all right, speaking of eggs, we have to talk about the alien queen, which means we need to talk about the special effects in this movie.
Yeah.
Which are, these are by Stan Winston, generally thought to be the greatest special effects artist of all time. He's definitely in the conversation with like Phil Tippett and guys like that. This Alien Queen animatronic is one of the most incredible things ever built for a film. It took 18 people to operate this thing simultaneously. It's got so much detail. It's actually the size that it is in the movie. Like, it is actually that big and that unwieldy. But you 100% believe it. It's such a haunting moment where you finally get to like Ripley has Newt. They're getting ready to go back to the ship. They wander into the nest, and the music dies, and the beeping stops, and everything kind of gives out. So we can really live in that little quiet moment. We get to see the reveal of like this massive crested monster that's attached to this.
Hudson was right.
Yeah, is attached to this big like egg sack thing that's like spitting out these eggs. Every one of them is going to turn people into another alien. It is a ferocious, gigantic killing machine. And the fact that the way to combat this thing is with the power loader, which is that big yellow suit that they actually built. That's a real thing that they are actually walking around in with all these animatronics. Is such an inspired decision. The whole movie kind of sprung from that idea.
It was
James
also
Cameron wrote a script involving a power loader.
Really interesting how they made the they had demonstrations of intelligence by the aliens. Like she was like, oh no, don't, like, if you back off aliens, and don't kill my babies. And then Ripley's like, no, I'm gonna kill your babies.
Yeah.
And then she's like, comes after her, and she uses the fucking elevator.
Yeah.
Just like, okay, how smart are these aliens?
Because there was also the point earlier on, where you get that too, of where they're like, the power goes out, and like, did they just cut the power? And Hudson's like, they're animals, man. There's no way they cut the power. And that's when you start to realize they're thinking.
Yeah.
They're strategizing. They're not just mindless killing machines like we may have assumed from the first movie.
Right.
Because in the first movie, they didn't have to do that. Well, we did see them being crafty, though. We did see them hiding. We did see them doing stuff. And so this was like that evolution of like learning about them, of like, oh, okay, no. They're figuring things out.
This is just great yes-anding on Cameron's part, because like, we really learn very little about the alien, its biology, where it comes from, how it's produced. We learn very little about that in the first movie. So it still gets to be this really cool reveal. We now know that like okay, they come from eggs. So like, you know, it follows that similar to like bees or insects or ants or anything like that, they probably have a queen. And they drop that kind of like a throwaway line, like in the middle of the movie. Like she just sort of plants a seed. She's like, all right, well, there are hundreds of eggs per colonist. Who's laying all the eggs?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you talk about the colonists, because like the big sort of reveal that's not like very shocking was that Burke was in on it the whole time.
Yes. We didn't mention Paul Reiser. Yeah.
And Paul Reiser's character Burke, like completely didn't. He sent 150 plus colonists to their deaths, and he doesn't care, and he deliberately tries to infect Ripley and Newt because he's just that much of a piece of shit. And
he plays that so incredibly, I think, because he is not like a slimy, like hand-wringing little weasel the entire movie. He is a good guy throughout the movie. He is supporting Ripley's choices. He is backing her 100%. And then he just sort of reveals himself to be like this manipulative shit.
Up until he starts trying to take control of the situation, like everything he's done has been nice, kind, nurturing. He was genuinely seemed to be interested in helping Ripley get, you know, better and deal with her issues.
Yeah.
And he was also one of the first people, other than the doctors, that she saw when she came back. He was the one who broke the news of the time passage.
Yeah.
And then to have him be the person who's like, let's smuggle some aliens out.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not cool with that?
And it's not even a scene of like him on the phone with his bosses or something like to indicate that. It's just him turning off a monitor. So creepy. We don't see him planting anything. You just like, he knows.
She sets the rifle down and then lays down with Newt, takes a nap, wakes up, the rifle's gone, aliens free. The face hugger.
Yeah.
And so you know somebody took their rifle, and then that cutaway and him just
click. Yep. Oh, that's a great way to play characters like that. So few people have followed his lead on it.
It's always, everybody makes it so obvious.
Yeah.
They make them an unlikable character in ways beforehand. And so having that change too, of like, we have an android that she's clearly not at the beginning very excited about.
No.
And then he says, oh, there's been new protocols put in place. I can't do that. And you're like, Or can you?
And that's an interesting contrast too, because Bishop is another one who he's kind of playing the same role. He's very supportive, he's very straightforward, but you kind of suspect something's going to go wrong with him just because we know the shared history.
But then,
we don't expect the same thing coming from Burke.
He ends up being the absolute bro who puts things on the line to save Ripley.
Bishop's a badass. I love Bishop.
It becomes the incredible, pretty much the savior of the day besides Ripley. And then
we need to see
Burke, was that his name?
Burke, yeah.
And then he becomes the face, and you're like, oh no.
That is my one bummer, is that Burke dies off screen. We don't get to see what happens to Burke. He goes into a closet, we see an alien, and then we hear a scream.
Yeah.
But we do get to see a little bit of milk spray, because we've established in the first movie that androids are full of milk, so we're not gonna not show that. We gotta show it, and boy do they ever.
Yeah, they do.
Poor Bishop gets bisected by the alien queen, and then like thrown haphazardly into chunks all over the ship.
And the preferred way, last week's game, the preferred way the alien kills you is to like stab you through the middle with their tail.
Yes, that's exactly the way he goes.
Yes.
But yeah, so the showdown at the end with Ripley and the Queen in the power loader is so incredible. Get away from her, you bitch. What an iconic line. So incredible. I mean, we were kind of at the I guess we were sort of at the forefront at this time of taking back the word bitch, right? It used to be kind of just a way that men would derogatorily refer to women. This was kind of the beginning of like women sort of taking it back as a power statement, which I think is great. And Sigourney Weaver just puts so much mustard on it. It's so good. Yeah, I just love the way she says it. But yeah, and we also get the kind of verisimilitude from the first movie of killing this alien by forcing it out the airlock. Yeah, which is it's a great way to kill it, because that's a horrifying death. We don't think about it in movies, but that's a horrifying.
It is a horrifying death.
That's something I. If you can't tell, I like sci-fi. I love the show The Expanse so much.
Right.
And that is something that they absolutely kind of touch on, is just kind of how terrifying those final moments out in space are.
Yeah.
Because they are moments. You don't live very long in a vacuum.
No. And the way that movies have chosen to demonstrate this varies from either like turning into ice or your eyeballs exploding, you know? So we don't get to see that much detail from this alien, but it is safe to say that it's not going to survive this.
Yeah.
What a movie. What a goddamn movie. It ends, of course, the same way that the first one does, with survivor, plural, because there was a survivor in the first one. Then they added an S and then a $. So now there's survivors. Hicks makes it out. He gets a little acid burn and put under, but he's fine. It is also smart to take Hicks out of the equation for the final.
Yes.
Like, they don't kill him because we don't want him to die. But
no,
like,
he's so likable.
He's so likable, but he is... And he and Ripley just have so much sexual
chemistry.
chemistry. They're burning through the screen.
Let me show you how to fire this rifle.
Come on.
And then she's like,
the
no.
way he's able to do
Teach
that
me
without
everything.
seeming like patriarchal or crude.
Like, it shows how great of an actor he is, because he's not sanctimonious about showing her.
No.
And he's also like, he's there, he's present, and he's sexy, but he's not creepy.
Yeah.
Like it's a master.
And he respects the hell out of Ripley. Like, that is the paramount defining characteristic of Hicks, is he respects the shit out of Ellen Ripley.
And I think the big thing was that it's just a small moment, and there's a few small moments that Newt has, as we mentioned, with some of the other characters, but there's a moment where they're all I think it was when they're planning where they were going to put the sentries.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And Newt is like to the side of him trying to see, and he like picks her up and holds her while they're doing it. And that was the moment where I was
quietly
like,
paternal.
Yes. I was like, all right, this guy, there's always the chance that guy is going to be the one who turns later on. And that was the moment where I was like, I will be crushed if he's the one.
Oh yeah.
There's you can get a husband in Hicks and a wife in Vasquez.
Exactly. You got that. Yeah. Everybody in this squad is just in a gigantic throuple. Like, they trade off. They take turns having to have Hudson. But like, that's the cool thing. It's like these Marine characters turn out to be the good guys across the board. Even like Gorman, like the kind of unctuous, like commander who doesn't really know how to lead the squad turns out to be a pretty good guy in the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah.
You know, like he sacrifices himself to save them. You know,
There's the great moment where Ripley is like, we need to just get to the ship
Yeah.
and nuke this whole site from orbit.
Yeah.
And then Burke is like, oh, wait a minute, this is an expensive site. And this is the moment where I was starting to be like,
that's the one little hint you get. Yeah,
I
that
don't know
his-
about you.
Yeah, that's the one
not,
little indication that his motivations are not like
yes,
fully up and up.
But then you immediately get Hicks. Ripley's like, hey, that's cool and all, but you're not in charge here.
Yeah.
Next in the chain of command is Hicks. Hicks is
yeah.
in charge. And you have that moment where it doesn't seem like any of them really had a second thought other than like, no, we're just going to nuke this thing.
Yeah.
Because they're not the capitalists in this movie.
Exactly. They care about getting out alive, and yeah,
They are the pawns of capitalism in this movie. And so
Yeah.
when it comes down to capitalism with their own lives, they're like, nah, fuck it.
yeah, absolutely.
Let's
not.
burn however many billions this thing costs.
Yeah, our job is to come in and save these people. They're all dead. We're getting the fuck out of here. Yeah, it's bad.
I'm not gonna
We're not dying
risk
for some
everybody
property.
here's lives
Yeah.
for the man.
Oh, Ripley's line. It's like, this is a multi-billion-dollar installation. They can
And so-
bill me.
Yeah.
I love that.
Once again, the enemy of this movie was capitalism.
It's
Yeah.
going to be a continuing theme. Wayland Yutani is the big bad of this entire series, as we will continue to see.
One of the things that people who are listening to this probably don't know, but y'all probably have noticed, I like shirts of companies that aren't real, like movies
Oh, yeah.
and games. I'm absolutely going to get some shirts out of this.
Oh, get a
endeavor.
Wayland Yutani shirt. I think I have a
Yeah.
keychain around here. Yeah, that broke, but I do have a key.
It's like-
There's definitely material. Yeah,
I
for
love
sure.
to just wear T-shirts that have logos, but I don't like I don't wear a lot of band T-shirts because a lot of people ask questions about band shirts sometimes, and I have to
Oh,
explain
sure.
things, and I'm like, I don't want to have these conversations. But nobody questions a company logo. And so it's just like, all right, well, let me just roll up with these random logos from games and stuff.
Oh, the WT or the WY.
Yes,
is a good one.
yeah. And then the building a better tomorrow or whatever
Yeah.
their tagline is.
So good, so sinister.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I played the Alien role-playing game, and it's so
Oh, shit.
interesting because in it you get things called panic die. So every time you see something fucked up, you get a panic die, and you have to roll.
Love
and
it.
if you get a certain amount of panic, like which are ones, which have little aliens on the dice, you freak out and you go full auto, or you like have a freak out and can't go for a turn, or like you lose it just like Hudson loses it.
Okay,
Yeah.
if I organize a game of this, will you guys play this?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really
So
want to play it.
much.
This
And-
sounds fun.
I love stuff like that. So a little bit of a nerdy bit here. There's a season of
Yeah, this is the nerdy
Dimension.
part.
Yeah, there's a season of the Dimension 20 show where they implement a system like this, and I think it's a commonly regarded system. But basically, the way it works is that you start off with, like, let's say it's a D10, depending on what your mental situation is, and then you'll have like what the triggers are going to be to a degree, and it's like for how you could play somebody with PTSD or stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then whenever, or like you're in a moment where everybody's on edge and you can panic, whenever you roll the die, you might get like a bonus from whatever stat is related to it. But then every time you fail, not only do you have a break, but you switch to a lower die and all of the numbers stay the same for
Yeah.
your
Okay.
threshold.
Okay.
So now
Okay.
you have more of a chance to panic until you can have a
Yeah.
calming moment. You can have that nap with Newt, and then you get the next bigger die back.
In this game, you also get everyone plays a marine, and you have like secret things about like, oh, you're leaving the force in 4 weeks, or
I love
like,
that stuff.
You hate androids, or
I
things
like
like
that.
It's so much fun, and then my character was like, you think you're the biggest badass that's ever lived.
And like all of it fucking makes sense, and that's why the flavor stuff of like D&D 5e I'm not the biggest fan of, because it's like you only care about money, and it's like that's the only one. It's like you're supposed to roll a d6 and pick one of them, and I'm like, half of these will never be relevant to whatever we're doing today in this campaign, and the like one of them is just you like money.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
I mean, I do. Yeah. Go
Like-
go money. Go.
But
give,
like,
give me
give
some.
me Give me something more than that. Give me something like you are the macho, like, and like obviously you come up with that stuff yourself.
Oh, yeah.
In 5e, I don't think anybody uses that system. They just make whatever they want, and they're like, I'm just going to be the macho person.
But
I mean, I feel like we've naturally transitioned
Yeah,
to games here.
I think so.
I think that's a good time to talk about it. Like, this one's really interesting. Like we said, this one has such an impact on video gaming as a genre. Like, I would say starting with like Contra in 1987. It's like that's basically just aliens, you know.
Yeah.
This is also the game with like the most direct adaptations, sequels, spin-offs, things like that than anything else we've covered. So some of the titles inspired by this movie: Aliens, the computer game; Aliens, the adventure game; Aliens Online; Aliens, Thanatos Encounter; Aliens, Colonial Marines; Aliens, Fireteam Elite; and Aliens, Dark Descent, which just came out this year. So in this case, we had to narrow down which games we were going to actually talk about, and I went with the games that I had. One of which is the 1990 arcade adaptation, which I have just because you can play it for free in your browser. And the other is the Nintendo DS game Aliens Infestation, largely because it shares some DNA with a game that we have talked about before. So let's get into that, starting with Aliens Arcade. It was released in March of 1990. It's developed and published by Konami, and it is an arcade exclusive. This never got a home console release, which is a shame because I think it's a really solid little side scroller. It might have been too visually advanced to put on like the Super Nintendo or something, but it was a big hit too. This was Konami's second best-selling arcade console of that year, only after Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which was a huge game. Yeah, that was massive. This is a two-player cabinet. You can play as either Ripley or Hicks, although neither of them lent their likeness, so Ripley is very blonde in this. A move that we'll see happen in other games as we progress. They just like if they don't lend the likeness, turn them blonde. This is a run and gun shooter. You get upgrades to your basic machine gun. You get flamethrower attachments, smart bombs, things like that. And this game, yeah, like we said, this is available for free on browsers. Like you can just play it on your browser. And you can give yourself infinite credits, which means that this is one of the games that we have actually rolled credits on.
Yeah.
Or I should say J-Ban rolled credits on it.
On.
You pushed that bitch into space.
After legitimately going, I think we're good. And we're like, no.
Oh, no.
You're fighting one of the final boss. You're
I
almost
was gonna
there.
lose my mind. You were at the final boss. It was blinking rapidly, which everyone knows means it's about to die.
The countdown
And you're
timer.
like, I'm going to restart that from the beginning.
Well,
Like,
I was interested to play it from the beginning because it seems fun. Like it was a really charming game.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I mean, it switches from like first person to like third person behind the back for a couple of sequences, like when you're fighting certain bosses or racing down a tunnel.
It's never in first person, sir.
Oh, excuse me.
It's
I'm sorry.
always in third person.
From
However,
sides-
it shifts
2D
from side scrolling
to behind the back.
behind
That's
the
what
back.
I mean. Yes,
Yeah.
excuse me. This is also kind of capitalizing on something that the Alien series was doing in general, which is introducing some really wild variants of the xenomorph that don't really appear anywhere else. There was a action figure line around this time, which was kind of my first introduction to this series. My friend gave me one of these action figures for my birthday once.
Nice phone lock screen.
It's a thank you.
It's an Evil Dead lock screen.
It's a very the figure I got was this very portly little alien, this very squat little guy kind of sitting on his hind legs, and he's got two aliens in his chest that you could launch like little missiles.
Oh,
You know, that guy does not appear in any of the movies. There's like a rhino alien and like some little spider aliens, a bunch of different types. And I think they were trying to kind of get kids excited about the brand,
Yeah, I
which
think so.
worked for me,
Yeah.
apparently. But that's kind of what this is doing. You get a lot of like, there's little flying ones. There's like, what was the one? It's just one that's just like heavily armored and
There's-
rolling around in a ball.
Yeah, rolling around in a ball of like
Yeah.
multiple aliens.
well, it's just that it was one big alien.
Yeah, yeah.
It looked like it was multiple aliens in a ball, but it turned out to just be one big chonky boy who likes to roll.
But the designs are cool. I mean, this is
In the
this
wise
is-
words of Fred Durst.
Oh my God! Never again. This does have a lot of cool like creature designs and a lot of cool like alien designs and little bosses.
Very colorful aliens.
It's very
Yes.
colorful. There's like pink and green in aliens. They're really kind of popping.
And there are some aliens that change colors the more you damage them, so
Yeah.
you get a sense of like mostly the bosses of how well the boss fight's going.
There's zombies. That's
yeah.
a weird addition to this. Some of the corpses have come to life and are firing machine guns at you. Like that's the one thing that doesn't really feel unified with the rest of it. But hey, I'm fine shooting zombies no matter what. But this does kind of hit a lot of the same beats as in the movie. Like it is clearly an adaptation of the movie, including the final fight with the alien queen. Where you're in the power loader, you get to kind of drive around in a power loader, which basically just has two, one little smack,
It's like one smack.
You just kind of move your arm up and down and hope something gets in the way. It's like when you're fighting with your sibling when you're kids, you know, like yeah. Solid little arcade game. Like I never played this in an arcade. I've never actually seen a cabinet of this, but it's a shame that it never got a proper home release. I'm sure there's all kinds of license rights kind of tied up in that, but it's definitely an interesting, fun game, and you can play it just by Googling Aliens Arcade. Like the first link that comes up is play on your browser, so it's very easy to do. The other game we talked about was Alien Infestation. All right, so this game came out on October 11th, 2011. It's developed by WayForward and Gearbox, and it's published by Sega. Okay. And this is a Nintendo DS exclusive. So one of the few handheld games we played on the show.
And one of the ones to include major companies, Gearbox and Sega.
Absolutely.
Sega was the publisher, but Gearbox, well-known creators of many things, including Borderlands and some other stuff.
At this time, they were developing a game for the PS3 called Aliens Colonial Marines, which is famously one of the most troubled video game productions ever. Like it went
through
way
some
over
shit.
budget. Like there were a lot of like staff turnover during the time, and the game finally came out, and most people agree that it's kind of not done. It's kind of a famously bad game. But they were supposed to be developing a handheld version at the same time, and because of all the turmoil, Gearbox wasn't able to do it, so they outsourced it to WayForward Technologies. Now, we remember them because they are the developers of the second game we ever talked about, The Mummy Demastered.
Oh.
I was thinking that it felt very, very much like that.
Yeah. This is kind of the prototype for that game, which similarly, they're both kind of Metroidvania-style games with unique dying mechanics. The mechanic here is that you start off with a squadron of 4 Marines, and if you lose one of them, they are permanently dead. Once that one dies, then you just send in the next Marine to go recover his gear and try and get a little further. You can recruit up to 15 new Marines. They're hidden all around the complex, but this unfolds in the same way. It's kind of like Metroid in that you have a map that you're gradually building out as you explore, and you need to find certain items to access certain obstacles. But we didn't get too terribly far in this one.
We never made it to an alien.
We never saw an alien.
We made it to robots, and we were fighting some androids.
Absolutely. I think this game looks great.
Yeah.
I love this kind of like pixely style. I'm also a sucker for a Metroidvania style game. Like that's just kind of whatever reason that just really scratches a primordial itch for me. I like filling out a map. I like exploring every little nook and cranny.
I think the hard part for me is that I'm just not the biggest fan of like the DS and the 3DS and stuff, because I don't want to use the stylus for the bottom screen while I'm playing.
And I don't think this one really requires it very
But
much.
the touch sensitivity for like thumbing it, which is typically the fingers that are going to be around there, isn't the best.
Yeah.
So it just feels a little out. Sometimes I would have to hit the map like 6 times to get it to go away, which is probably something that you can get used to the more you play it. But
it's an interesting thing with DS and especially 3DS. These are systems designed on a very specific gimmick. They became successful, but only in the later days when they started trying to negate all of their gimmicks, when they started kind of trying to just make more straightforward games. Like the 3DS had a new variant released just called the 2DS, which removes like the thing that kind of made this novel, just because like people wanted to play more traditional games.
And because also certain people, me included, even with 3D disabled, if you played the 3DS for too long, you'd get a headache.
Yeah.
So I had a 3DS, I had a couple of Pokemon games, and I couldn't play them because regardless of the 3D setting, I would get a headache after 15 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's it. I always find that functionality pretty incredible. Like, still to this day, I'm like, oh wow, they managed to make like actual 3D effects without glasses. But it does drain the shit out of your battery, and you also need to hold your head so still while you're playing it that it kind of makes it a little less fun. It's a cool little novelty, but it's not very practical. No 3D effects in this game, of course.
What Nintendo has learned is that the gimmicks work well at the start, but then after a little while, people get bored of them.
Yeah.
And so that's why they went from the Wii to the Wii U, which had a different gimmick.
Yes.
And then soon people stopped caring about the gimmicks in that either. And then they just made the Switch, which was basically the successor to the DS line.
Yeah, it kind of fused it and sort of like eliminated their handheld market entirely.
Got rid of the dual screens.
Yeah.
Went down to one screen. I think the Switch might have touchscreen, but I don't actually know.
It does, yeah.
I don't think anybody uses it.
Yeah, it's got like very weird limited like touchscreen and motion controls too.
And it's because it's there and it's up to the developers to implement, and they're like, no one's going to care enough for us to invest the money into making these features work. Because then also the other trick to that is you can dock the 3DS and play it on your TV like a console. Yeah. And your TV's probably not touchscreen.
Mine is
I don't think any TVs are really touchscreen.
That'd be an inconvenient thing.
So then it's like, all right, well, now those features are gone, so the game has to be fully playable without them.
Yeah, that's what makes porting DS games so difficult in a lot of cases.
But Nintendo has time after time made gimmicks and then realized that while the gimmick was cool and fun, it got old and then dropped it, moved on.
Yeah. But to get back to Infestation,
yes.
This takes place after the events of Alien, which kind of of Aliens, which kind of doesn't really make sense because they blew up the planet at the end. So it might be, I don't know exactly when it takes place in that little liminal space between 1 and 2. But you do go onto the Sulaco and you go onto LV-426 to explore a little bit and encounter all these alien beasts. I've made it further into this game in the past. I've never beaten it because it does get very, very hard. But the problem we ran into when we played The Mummy Demastered, that game had a pretty interesting dying mechanic, which is if your character dies, it leaves behind a zombie that can attack you, and you need
with all of your equipment.
With all of your equipment,
you come back as somebody with no equipment.
Exactly, which proved to be pretty frustrating after a while because we kept just like getting killed and losing all of our equipment,
and there'd be three zombies in the same place because we died.
Exactly, they just keep multiplying.
Fun fact: we died because there were enemies there, not because it was an easy part of the level. Usually,
exactly.
So it's like, all right, well, we have to fight the enemies that killed us when we had all of the gear, and fight us with all the gear.
Yeah, I feel like this is a more practical application of
so.
that kind of idea. Like your Marines are not going to come back. Like the point is that they're gone, but you do have like named characters that you might get attached to just because like human beings will get attached to things with names.
The roguelike train.
A little bit.
To a degree.
But yeah, like we said, we played for a good little chunk of time here and never encountered an alien. It takes a bit to get to it because initially the threat is just rogue androids. Which is a similar tack that Alien Isolation took because they only have one alien in that, but you need other enemies, so you have a bunch of rogue androids. So yeah, it is a little dissatisfying to plug in a game called Alien Infestation, and it takes like a good 30 to 40 minutes before you see an actual alien in it. But like I said, I've made it fairly far in this, but yeah, I did hit a wall because eventually it just becomes pretty overwhelmingly difficult.
Okay.
Which is something that like I think Way Forward does a really good job designing these little 2D games and coming up with some really novel ideas. But the ideas don't always coalesce perfectly with the gameplay or with the level of challenge. We'll play some more of their games in the future where I think they got the balance pretty right. And this one is a step in the right direction, ironically, because we're moving chronologically backwards. This game came out 6 years before the other Mummy game that we talked about. But I still think they're really innovative and interesting developers that always put in more work than they need to.
Which is always a good thing.
It's always
well,
welcome.
As is usually a good thing. Sometimes they put more work into things, and you're like, this doesn't need to be here.
Hey,
We could have put this work somewhere else.
I
That
will
would have
always
been more
take that
useful.
over like just
But-
indifference, like
Yes.
these guys have made like Lizzie McGuire games that like could probably have just been tossed off, and they made them pretty well. Like they made Sabrina the Teenage Witch games that are quite fun.
Wait, are you gonna say we're gonna watch the Lizzie McGuire movie later?
We might. I got to check if there's a game for the movie. There's definitely games for the show, but yeah, we might. But yeah, Lizzie McGuire, I think she would have made a pretty good Colonial Marine, right? Yeah, she would have been a good Space Marine.
She would have been a fine Space Marine.
I think she would have done great. Lock and load, 5x5 in the pipe. Yeah, this movie also just invented a lot of like great military sounding nonsense. I love that. All right, people, assholes and elbows. Like what does that mean? I don't care. He says it with a cigar in his mouth. He's great.
At what point do assholes and elbows come into this?
I always think it's funny when people are smoking on spaceships.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not worried about explosive decompression. I guess they got that part.
Well, in
figured
theory,
out.
the hole's going to be able to withstand whatever their cigarette or
Yeah.
cigar is going to do. It's more about the air filtration system.
Apone comes out of his frozen pod with a cigar in his mouth. Like he pops out and just like, yeah. So yeah, that's a choice. But that's Aliens. Do we have any final things to say about Aliens before we move on to rankings?
I really loved the music in Aliens.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yes,
thought it was
James
a
Horner.
good mixture of action, adventure, music, and silence. So I thought that was a really great teaming of the first movie and delicious action sequences.
So
And
propulsive.
really great use of horns. Like really great.
This is one of those scores that's in like every other trailer, like for like a decade after its release. Like anytime you have an action movie, you need the ding 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 ding. Yeah, like you need that intense music. Pretty great. And James Horner apparently had to throw this score together kind of last minute because James Cameron's shooting style was so erratic at this time, and he had to kind of throw it together. But it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to
Well,
our.
I have one little mini fun fact.
Please.
And this goes back to Halo again. It's a little trivia piece. In the Halo series, especially 1 through 3, depending on what difficulty you're playing on, the dialogue might change.
Oh, yeah.
So certain lines will be different. A lot of Sergeant Johnson's lines are different depending on what one you're on. But near the beginning of Halo 2, it's where, spoiler alert, the aliens come to Earth.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a point where I don't remember what difficulty it's on. It might be one of the higher ones, but you're like, it's a cut scene. You're about to do some cool, badass stuff. And you can just hear the radio chatter of the space battle and stuff going on in the background. And you can hear somebody screaming, game over, man, game over.
Of course. You got it.
So, yeah.
That's printed on the back of the box for
Yeah.
Alien Infestation. Yeah, it's just kind of become like the tagline. All right, well, let's move on to our rankings. Is this a good movie, good game, bad movie, bad game, or somewhere in between? I think I've tipped my cards on this one. I think this is a great movie, fantastic movie, so much fun, so influential, and I thought both of these games were solid for different reasons. I think I do want to spend a little bit more time with Infestation and really kind of see it through and see how much further I can get, because I love the idea of this game. If the execution doesn't always kind of come together for me, I think it's still worth the effort of going through it. And this arcade game is totally solid.
Yeah. For me, it's a great film.
Tony the
great
Tiger.
film,
Oh, I was about to
and a good game. Like the arcade. I love arcade games, and I think they're just so charming, especially when you have unlimited quarters.
Yes.
Like you can just really enjoy the game before you get frustrated by it.
Without burning through your allowance. Yeah.
And it's just like, it's so much fun because you get to play it and you get to roll credits as opposed to spending like $25-$30 to roll credits.
Yeah, exactly.
On a show.
Yeah, because we used a solid 30 credits, I think.
At least. You die pretty easily. in
At
this
like
game.
minimum. Sorry, did you have anything else?
That's
Okay. Yeah, I thought it was a good movie. It was a great time. It's straight up my alley in terms of the genre and things that I like.
Yeah.
And it was very well executed. You had a lot of you had group fights, you had individual fights. It basically covered almost everything you'd want to see in a movie like that.
Fantastic.
And the games were fun.
Yeah.
I think the arcade game, it's all pretty much been said, but it was just a fun, especially again having less pressure. It was nice, chill to play. I think the 3DS game, or DS game or whatever.
DS, yeah.
I think it had. There was less enemies in it than the
arcade
Mummy
one?
game.
Oh yeah, the Mummy. Yeah.
And I think it was potentially going to be better at having like the suspense in the kind of thriller aspect to it. So I think that would have been fun if that is the way it went.
Yeah.
We didn't really get far enough to do that. The androids weren't very suspensey. They weren't super terrifying. But I imagine once we started encountering actual aliens, it probably would have kicked off and been much more.
Yeah, it gets much more action heavy.
Yeah,
as
more
you get into it.
anxiety about death.
For
and,
sure. Especially you get
yeah.
attached. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. Our Alien series is continuing in earnest. Next week we are talking about Alien 3 or Alien Cubed, if you want to just pronounce how it's stylized. A hugely divisive movie that I go to bat for hard. I'm going to talk about it next week because it'll be my third podcast in as many months talking about Alien 3. I'm excited to get into it. Yeah, I'm excited to see what you guys think of it too.
I'm excited to revisit this because I have the vaguest memory of it, and I don't even know whether or not it's the right one that I have the memory of. I've become a big David Fincher fan,
Yes.
so I'm really interested to see like me knowing who David Fincher is now as an adult, seeing his nascent efforts.
Yes, very much so. And yeah, if you have the time, listeners at home too, if you have the time to do both versions, there's a theatrical version and then there's an extended version called the Assembly Cut, which adds a half an hour that kind of fills in the gaping plot holes that were left in the theatrical film and like adds a really interesting new storyline and kind of fixes a lot of the people's problems with the movie. So worth checking out both if you have the chance to get the contrast. I've recently watched both in a row, so I'm prepped to talk about it. But if you have a chance to catch the Assembly Cut, that's a really interesting movie.
I'm just really sad that there isn't two S's at the end.
Yes, yeah.
Just put
Aliens.
another S.
Just keep them going and make them snakes.
Yeah, that's legitimately the thought I had. I
That's
was like,
the move.
it's,
Hey, they are snakes at one point in their life. Yeah, they're little guys. They're little guys who pop out of chest and snake around. All right, folks. Well, we will see you next time for Alien 3. Lock and load in the pipe. 5 by 5.